Is radical Islam nothing more than an Israeli Psy-Op? Tucker Carlson thinks so. Trump is threatening to annex Greenland. Silver got up over $80 on Tuesday, and a J6 defendant is claiming that he was tortured and brutally abused while wrongfully imprisoned. Stay tuned the rest of this week for all of that and more. I'm Carson Wagner. This is The Carson Wagner Show. What's up, folks? Welcome back to the show. So we have a lot to address. We got a lot on the menu today, and some very interesting little tidbits that we're going to talk about. The first is, I know I've been talking about Tucker Carlson a lot lately, but he just keeps doing more and more outrageous things that need to be called out and attention needs to be brought to. So we're going to talk about him again. Tucker got on the American Conservative podcast just not too long ago and said something that is so outrageous and so out of bounds and so incompetent for an experienced journalist like him that it reaches the level of being, considered for candidacy for a full-blown lie, full-blown conscious lie. So I'm gonna break down what's going on. I'm gonna break down why Tucker is doing this. And I want to, and I'll play the clip in a second from the podcast, but I want to emphasize to everyone first, I've been talking about Tucker a lot lately, and I want to make something very clear. I like Tucker. He seems to be a genuine Christian as far as I can tell. He's a very interesting guy. He's very intelligent. He's done an incredible amount of good, especially with the Butler shooter and his work on Fox News and the J6 stuff, which we're going to be talking about later. He helped expose a lot of the cover-up and a lot of the corruption, and I will be forever grateful to him for that. But he keeps pulling things that are just unreal. Like, the level of craziness is off the charts. And it's like, of course, him and Candace and the whole new right crowd have this sort of monomaniac obsession with Israel. Israel's in everything they do. It almost reaches the point where you call it, mental illness because of just how insane it is. They're obsessed with Israel. He got into this on the American Conservative podcast, and I don't even know what to think. But you'll see what he says in just a moment. But again, I want to emphasize, I like Tucker. None of this is meant to attack him personally. I think we do need, to some extent, unity in the conservative movement. But at the same time, there are people who should not have microphones. There are people who have, whether because, they're going through a midlife crisis, or they are too emotional, or they are too blinded by certain ideas that they don't like, or, whatever is going on, they should not have a microphone because they're not objective truth speakers. They're not objective truth speakers. Tucker has reached the point where I would argue that he is no longer an objective truth speaker. Candace Owens crossed that many, many times ago, many podcast episodes ago. Nick Fuentes also crossed that many words ago. I think he crossed that like back when he was very first beginning. No one should ever really have listened to him. And others have done the same. I think Steve Bannon has definitely crossed that line. I would argue that it's entirely possible Megyn Kelly has too. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's on the new right and also has this monomaniac obsession with Israel, has crossed a line. I don't know if it's that line. She has crossed the line where she should never be allowed back in politics, which is great that she's getting out of politics because she's done an incredible amount of good. I'm very grateful to her. Again, I like her. I think she also is a genuine Christian like Tucker. I'm not attacking her personally, but she has said things that disqualify her from a career in politics ever again, or any sort of public career. She needs to go home and work a normal job or garden or, do something to get her mind off of world events. I feel like Tucker needs to do the same. So anyways, this is a long intro, but I just wanted to make it very clear that I'm not personally attacking Tucker. I like Tucker in a lot of ways. He gets a ton of stuff right, but this is just insane and it needs to be called out. I don't ever advocate for the removal of free speech. I think Tucker should be able to say whatever he wants, and Nick Fuentes should be able to say whatever he wants, and even Candace Owens, and everybody, even the left, everybody in the left should be able to see whatever they want, to say whatever they want. But the conservative movement should not follow them and should not listen to them if they're just spouting off insanity like this. Take a listen.
Keep USA did a poll during AmFest, or I guess it was after AmFest, and they asked the audience, what they considered to be the greatest threat to America. And they did put radical Islam at number one. I'm wondering where you think those sentiments are coming from. I mean, I've heard you say before that this is an op and that we all know which foreign government it's actually coming from. Which government is it, and can you explain how that operation works? How is it, kind of lured into those?
It comes from the Israeli government and its many defenders and informal employees in the United States, of course. And I guess I would just say if that was actually, I don't know how people responded to the poll. I don't know who answered it, but, I believe in measuring reality a little more empirically. And, I don't know anyone in the United States in the last 24 years who's been killed by radical Islam.
So that was Tucker Carlson on The American Conservative being interviewed by Harrison Berger. And what he went on to say, to give you some context, he went on to say that Israel is the biggest, the most important threat to the United States. Second to Israel would be social issues, that come from not having Christ over culture, essentially, and things that people are addicted to. And our culture's just degeneration into madness and utter lunacy, which is all correct. Those are serious things. But he places those as higher threats to the West than radical Islam, which is pure insanity. I mean, I was born in 2009. I've grown up in, I've been conscious of the political scene for the last maybe 5 or 6 years. And I've heard the left say some really, really crazy things. But I don't think I ever expected the most crazy thing I'd ever hear to come from someone on the right. I mean, that's what he's saying. It's legitimately the nuttiest thing I've ever heard. And it's just simply not true. And I know Tucker's extremely smart. I don't understand how, unless he's just flat out lying, which I guess maybe he could be. I don't even know what to think about this. There's no way there's no way that he can just say what he just said with a straight face and not know that it's completely factually incorrect on like a billion different levels. So first off, I want to note 3 things about this. First off, the interviewer, Harrison Berger, is throwing him a softball. He's obviously on his side. He hints at it. We all know which foreign government this comes from. So Harrison is offering no pushback on this, which would have been extremely helpful to get pushback. It would have been extremely helpful for Harrison to ask something like, well, Tucker, you've said in the past that radical Islam is a bigger threat, or Israel's a bigger threat than radical Islam to the West. Explain that, because it looks to me like radical Islam is a far bigger threat, considering the fact that they're killing us actively all over the place, and Israel's not. And Israel is one of our best and closest allies. All they've ever done is help us and assist us. And they're filled with a bunch of sane people who aren't, running around screaming and chopping people's heads off and blowing up planes and flying them into buildings and shouting Allahu Akbar all the time. That's the kind of question he should have asked. He should have given serious pushback to that. But incidentally, like Tucker Carlson in the Nick Fuentes interview, he's just throwing this softball question that's really not giving any pushback, and it's not a journalist question. It's an interview. It's the question of an interviewer who has already made up his mind and already agrees with the interviewee, which I think is wrong. That should not have been done. So that's the first thing I want to note. The second thing is that what Tucker says is just crazy. Radical Islam is an Israeli Psy-Op. Where did he come up with that? Like, genuinely, where did he get that? I would love to have him right here, and I'd love to ask him, did that come out of your own head, or did you read that in some deep, dark, corner of the web on Reddit? And, since Reddit is like 80% Chinese bots, it's probably a Chinese thing. So does that mean that that radical Islam is an Israeli Psy-Op, but the Israeli Psy-Op is a China Psy-Op? I don't know. It's funny. That's an interesting thought, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. The key here is that this is just flat out factually incorrect. Radical Islam has been around for far longer than the state of Israel has been around. And we have been fighting them for hundreds of years, going all the way back to the Crusades. And Israel became a state in the 20th century, the mid 20th century. So that's just absolutely crazy. Like, why would you even, I mean, he's a smart guy. So I don't understand how he could make a claim like that and expect it to be even accepted. The conservative movement needs to make it clear that things like this are out of the boundary, and that if Tucker continues to say things like this, he has crossed a serious line, and he's not going to be allowed back inside the tent. So there's also the fact that Israel, since its inception, has been fighting these radical Islamist lunatics who want to abolish them and kill everybody in Israel and make them bow the knee to Allah. They've been fighting these people for as long as they've existed, because these people have wanted Israel's territory for themselves, and they're fighting them right now in Gaza. It's gone on literally since the state of Israel existed, and it's gone on long before that too. Islamists have always hated Christians, and they've always hated Jews, the people of God, the people of the God of Abraham, but not the God of Abraham through Ishmael, as they would claim, but the God of Abraham through Isaac, which is the God that I subscribe to, the God that the Jews subscribe to. That's why they hate us. And it's just crazy to say that it's all an Israeli Psy-Op. Like, what evidence does he have for that? And what motive would there even be? And my listeners obviously are not going to need any defense of the fact that radical Islam is far more dangerous than the state of Israel ever is, considering the fact that the state of Israel has never done anything to hurt us. Literally never done anything to hurt us. Ever. All they've ever done is help us and assist us. And Islamists are regularly murdering us and pulling things like 9/11. The third thing I want to address is his claim about the 24 years. So first off, note that he specifically put it at 24 years so that he could avoid having to talk about 9/11, which is a little sneaky if you ask me, because 9/11 would be 25 years ago. Since now is 2026, which is just crazy. Like it's, I don't even know. It doesn't even feel real. It feels like it should still be 2025. But anyways, he makes the claim that no Americans have been killed by radical Islam in the past 24 years that he knows of. And if that is correct, if he does not know of a single American that has been killed in the past 24 years by radical Islam, he has lost his right to be a journalist, because that is the most factually incorrect thing I've ever heard in my entire life. What was the Fort Hood shooting? 13 people were killed. The doctor who killed everybody at Fort Hood, his name was Nidal Hassan. He was an army psychiatrist. He killed 13 people. That was in 2009. That was within the 29-year bound. That was within the 24-year boundary. He was a radical Islamist. The Boston Marathon bombing in 2013, the Sarnaev brothers killed 3 people and injured hundreds. The San Bernardino attack in 2015, there were 14 people killed by a married couple inspired by ISIS. One of the biggest was the Orlando Pulse nightclub shooting in 2016. 49 people killed by Omar Mateen, who pledged allegiance to ISIS and was part of ISIS. The New York truck attack in 2017, 8 people were killed when a man drove a truck down a bike path. And that's just Americans. Those are just the most prominent examples. And that's just Americans killed inside the United States. Americans killed abroad, the number increases tremendously. And we're already almost at 100 people just with the Americans that have been killed inside the States. Tons of journalists and aid workers and contractors were kidnapped and killed during the wars in the Middle East by groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, including James Foley and Stephen Sotloff and Kayla Mueller. These were all American citizens. What about all the military personnel who died in Iraq and Afghanistan? Were they not American citizens? They died in combat with Islamic terrorist groups. And then there have been tons of terror attacks that targeted Americans or Westerners in locations abroad, like Benghazi in 2012, which was an utter disaster, where 4 American citizens, including Ambassador Christopher Stevens, were killed. And then, of course, the recent October 7th attack. There were Americans killed in that attack by the Islamists who breached the wall and came in and started burning everything to the ground. And there have been other Americans killed since. So this claim is just absolutely insane. And the fact that he doesn't know that either suggests he's lying, he's mentally ill and blinded by his obsession with Israel, or he really is that ignorant, which I don't think it's the third. I don't think it's even possible he's that ignorant. He's one of the smartest people I ever know. He came out at AmFest and delivered like a 30-minute speech, one of the most brilliant and captivating and charismatic and smart, intelligent speeches I've ever heard from any conservative leader ever. And he did it totally off the cuff. Totally off the cuff. There were no notes. There was no nothing. Even Ben Shapiro in his speech was using notes. He was reading from a script. So this guy is absolutely brilliant. He's got to be one of the smartest conservative leaders there is. And he's pulling stuff like this. So I don't believe that he doesn't know any of that. So the options are either literally he's lying or he's mentally ill. And to avoid getting sued for defamation, I'll let you make up your mind about which one that is. But I think those are literally the two possibilities. And I don't know what else to say about Tucker. This is just crazy. And every time he does this, he needs to be called out by everyone simultaneously. And people need to boycott his show. And they need to say, enough of this. We're not going to put up with these lies and nonsense. If the conservative movement is to remain intact, and if we are not going to follow the same mistake the Democrats did, letting these radicals in who are going to eventually take over the entire place, then we need to get rid of them. I wish it wasn't that way. I love Tucker, but he has crossed a line. And honest conservatives need to make it clear to him, as in millions of honest conservatives, need to make it clear to him that he is not part of the conservative movement anymore. And he's not a patriot. He's not a journalist. He's not honest. Is there, if there were, I wish there was another option. I genuinely wish there was. And if you could think of another option, put it down in the comments. But this cancer needs to be cut out of the conservative movement, and it needs to be cut out now. In other news, Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, got up yesterday at a press briefing and said some interesting things about Greenland, which is, interesting, but probably shouldn't be too surprising given what we've just seen with Venezuela. So here's that clip right here.
There have also been reports that the U.S. could potentially buy Greenland as one potential option on the table. What would such an offer look like? Is there anything monetarily you could provide, any details there?
Well, that's something that's currently being actively discussed by the president and his national security team. And I would point out that the acquisition of Greenland by the United States is not a new idea. This is something that presidents dating back to the 1800s have said is advantageous for America's national security. The president has been very open and clear with all of you and with the world that he views it in the best interest of the United States to deter Russian and Chinese aggression in the Arctic region. And so that's why his team is currently talking about what a potential purchase would look like.
Caroline.
Jackie.
Caroline, just following up on Greenland, why not rule out taking it by military force?
I know that past presidents and past leaders have often ruled things out. They've often been very open about ruling things in and basically broadcasting their foreign policy strategy to the rest of the world, not just to our allies, but most egregiously to our adversaries. That's not something this president does. All options are always on the table for President Trump as he examines what's in the best interests of the United States. But I will just say that the president's first option always has been diplomacy. Again, look at Venezuela. He tried ardently to strike a good deal with Nicolas Maduro, and he told him, I will use the United States military and you will not like it if you don't take such a deal. And look at what happened. With respect to Iran, the president said the same thing, right? He tried to have serious interest in a deal with the Iranian regime with respect to their nuclear capabilities. They were not interested, and so Operation Midnight Hammer happened, which was another remarkable military success under the leadership of this commander-in-chief. So the president keeps his options open, but diplomacy is always the first.
Quickly, just one additional follow-up on that. Does the president recognize Denmark's ownership as part of the kingdom? Because there have been some Republican senators questioning, the claim that Denmark has to Greenland. Is the president in that camp with them, questioning the legality of
I have not heard him question it personally, but you're welcome to ask him yourself next time you have the chance.
Caroline, thank you and Happy New Year.
Thanks, you too.
Two questions, one on Venezuela, one on Greenland. You've repeatedly at the podium called the current leadership in Venezuela interim leadership. There are Republicans and Democrats alike that say they want to see elections in Venezuela. The president has said it's too soon to do that right now, but is there a timeline for elections in Venezuela? Is he committed to seeing that this year, for example?
You just said the president has answered that question, so I will reiterate what the president has said a few times now to all of you, which is that it's too premature and too early to dictate a timetable for elections in Venezuela right now.
Caroline, you just talked to Jackie about diplomacy first, right? The Danes have repeatedly said they are willing to collaborate on all of the concerns that the president has, whether it's more troops, mineral rights, intelligence sharing. Why does the president feel he needs to own Greenland and not and put out the threat of military action when this could be done through diplomacy?
Well, who said diplomacy isn't taking place behind the scenes, Dasha? I mean, the president is interested in diplomacy. His national security team is as well. And of course, he's always willing to pick up the phone for everybody and hear out their concerns. But the president is the president of the United States of America, and he's always going to be very clear about what he views as being in our nation's best interest. Phil.
Thank you, Caroline. Just to follow up on Greenland, there are treaties already on the books that give the United States access to the island. They can construct and maintain military bases there. We can house personnel on the island. The U.S. has control of landings, takeoffs, anchorages, etc. So I'm curious if you could just spell out for the American public, what specifically would the U.S. gain by taking control of Greenland that the U.S. doesn't already have access to right now?
More control over the Arctic region and ensuring that China and Russia and our adversaries cannot continue their aggression in this very important and strategic region. And there would be many other benefits as well that, again, the president and his national security team are currently talking about.
Now, Caroline did, in that clip, obviously a great job of explaining what the president is actually up to and I think why he wants Greenland. But I'm going to go a little more in depth. Here's some context. Trump has, first off, he is, like she said, he has consistently discussed annexing Greenland since before retaking office in January of 2025. I know of at least one diplomatic envoy that he sent to Greenland consisting of Charlie Kirk, Sergio Gore, and Don Jr. Since then, and he has refused to rule out military action in taking Greenland if need be. He actually said back in May, and this is interesting, that he wouldn't rule out anything, including military action, because we need Greenland very badly. So, of course, the question is, why do we need Greenland? And I will get into that in a second. But the issue intensified dramatically this weekend following the military operation in Venezuela that left Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro a captive of the United States. And he's right in the Southern District of New York right now. He got arraigned in federal court on Monday on drug terrorism charges and some other interesting high-level things, him and his wife. So we'll see where that goes. But what this Venezuela thing shows us is that the president Trump is obviously not scared to use whatever is at his disposal. And this is something I think that is really, really important and something I really like about Trump. Trump is, for all of his faults and for all of his, for all his virtues and all his vices, Trump is really, really good at opening up other options. So, like, for example, when the Venezuela thing went on, I know a lot of presidents wouldn't have considered this sort of blatant military action, or they would have done it very secretly and on the down low. That's not Trump. Trump is keeping his options very open. And that's one of the things I like about him. And he's using the full range of abilities that is available to him as president of the United States, which is something all presidents should be doing, but it's something that very few presidents actually do, at least very few modern presidents. Trump is a modern president who is doing that. So, I support that 100%, and I'm behind that. And I like that he's doing that. The thing is, when you do what he did in Venezuela, he's sending a message to the rest of the world. And I know that message was also specifically aimed at Cuba and Mexico in particular to try to get them to back off what they're doing and be like, okay, the president is not afraid to literally just depose any leader he thinks is problematic, which is totally justified. Obviously there may be a situation which is not justified, but this is something that the president of the United States does need to be able to do. So it's entirely possible that one of the reasons for the Maduro operation was to scare people into submission, including the Danish government, who they currently run Greenland, and ready the world for a Greenland operation. I was reading last night that 84% of Greenlanders from a survey in 2018 want to be free from Danish rule because they don't like they don't like Denmark very much, or most of them. And about 6% of them would be in favor of the U.S. coming in and taking the place over and it becoming a United States territory, essentially. Random tidbit: Trump appointed the Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry as a special Greenland envoy in December, and he said he was thankful for the honor to serve in this volunteer position to make Greenland a part of the United States. So obviously it's something that's cooking. It's been cooking for a while. The Trump administration's been talking about it. But it's not just the Trump administration. Like Karoline Leavitt said, this is a historical thing with U.S. presidents. Secretary of State William Seward, the famous guy, the guy who bought Alaska, who's famous for buying Alaska, he went on a territory shopping spree in 1868. And after he successfully negotiated the purchase of Alaska from Russia, which was, of major benefit to the United States, for $7.2 million. Only $7.2 million. That's just nuts. But obviously that was worth a lot more in 1868. And he was able to buy, he was able to negotiate the purchase of Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million. And that was finalized in 1867, actually. He tried to then go on another territory shopping spree, essentially, and add Greenland and Iceland to the quickly expanding United States. An 1868 report commissioned by Seward pointed to Greenland's vast fisheries, animal life, and mineral wealth, and also noted that an acquisition of Greenland might compel Canada to become part of the U.S. because it's located between Alaska and Greenland. So it's surrounded by the U.S. on all sides, except the very north, I guess, and they just got polar bears up there or whatever. The proposal failed, though, because by 1868, the purchase of Alaska was being actively mocked in newspapers, and there wasn't as much benefit as people thought there was going to be out of Alaska. Obviously, that benefit has shown itself to be greater over time, especially with the dawn of the ICBM age, and it's very beneficial that we're closer to Russia, but people didn't see that back then because they didn't have ICBMs back then. They didn't have nuclear missiles back then, and the newspapers were calling it Seward's Folly, Seward's Icebox, and Andrew Johnson's Polar Bear Garden. And at that point, Congress, the executive branch, and the American public had no appetite for more frozen territories full of ice and snow and the occasional gold deposit, I guess. In 1910, U.S. Ambassador Maurice Egan proposed an elaborate four-way trade. Denmark would cede Greenland to the United States. The U.S. would give Denmark a cluster of islands in the Philippines. Denmark would turn around and give the Philippine Islands to Germany, who's seeking more influence in the East. And Germany would give Schleswig-Holstein back to Denmark, something that they'd had for a while, and I guess it wasn't theirs. The U.S. government deemed this way too audacious and took no action, though it might have paved the way for the U.S. purchase of the Virgin Islands from Denmark in 1917. This was the closest the U.S. ever came to a attempt of Greenland. In 1946, immediately after World War II, the United States secretly offered, unbeknownst to the public, to buy Greenland from Denmark, with more than 10,000 Allied aircraft having landed on Greenland to refuel for bombing runs in Germany during the war. And the Truman administration saw massive, rightly so, saw massive strategic value in the island as a geographic bulwark against the ominous and rising Soviet Union. And U.S. advisors were prizing the geographic advantage Greenland could offer to defend against Soviet strategic bombers that might fly over the Arctic Circle into North America. The American side, they proposed just buying the island outright for $100 million in gold and the rights to a patch of valuable Alaskan oil, something that Denmark wanted to get their hands on. The proposal totally shocked the Danish government, and the foreign minister said, quote, "While we owe much to America, I do not feel that we owe them the whole island of Greenland," end quote. Ultimately, the U.S. and Danish governments agreed on other ways to incorporate Greenland into America's defenses without an outright sale, including the creation of NATO, the North American Treaty Organization, in 1949, and a bilateral agreement where the U.S. could continue operating and setting up military bases on the island as deemed appropriate by NATO. In 1955, the Joint Chiefs nonetheless proposed to President Eisenhower, so later on, that the nation should try to purchase Greenland again. And they wrote that, quote, "Sovereignty provides the firmest basis of assuring that a territory and its resources will be available for military use when needed," end quote. The State Department ended up responding that the time had passed to buy Greenland, and noting that the U.S. was already permitted to do almost anything, anywhere, literally, that we need to. So that's kind of some of the history behind it. The point is that pretty much since the 1860s, so for well over 150 years, the U.S. has wanted to buy Greenland and has seen it, even before the dawn of the ICBM age, as a location of massive strategic importance in its defenses against the Soviet Union. And there's a couple reasons for this. Obviously, we've got the Soviet Union thing, but then Greenland is also, despite much of it being covered in ice, has known reserves of rare earth minerals that are almost equal to those of the United States, and it's much, much smaller than the United States. So that's just a crazy statistic. And according to one Greenland official, the island possesses 39 of the 50 minerals that the United States has classified as absolutely critical to national security and economic stability of the nation. These minerals are essential for things like electric vehicles, smartphones, military weapons, wind turbines, and other advanced technologies. Now, there's also another side to this. When Trump went into Venezuela and got Maduro out, one of the big reasons he did that was because China was hand in hand with Venezuela. And in a way, Venezuela was caught in the middle between us and China, and they were actively trying to hurt us. So it's not like Venezuela was, totally innocent and caught in the middle. But Venezuela think of Venezuela as a little fish in the ocean surrounded by a bunch of sharks the size of ocean liners. And China was using Venezuela, and Venezuela was happily being used by China. And by deposing Maduro, the U.S. is sending a clear and blatant message to China that their involvement in our hemisphere needs to stop. So another huge location that China is actively involved in our hemisphere, technically our hemisphere, is Greenland, which is interesting. Roughly 90% of processed rare earths in Greenland come from China, and they're creating supply chain vulnerabilities that many countries are trying to avoid, particularly since China announced restrictions on the export of heavy rare earths in April 2025. Now, finally, of course, Greenland's geographical position is strategic for many things, including military defense, but also the Northwest Passage shipping lane, which is a hugely important shipping lane that is almost as important as the one through the Panama Canal. It runs along its coast, and the island is part of the Greenland-Iceland-United Kingdom gap, which is a very strategic maritime region for all shipping companies of all types. And the Arctic warming would lead to many summers where they could get as many or, more shipping lanes open there than through the Panama Canal, which often becomes blocked and clogged, and everybody's trying to use it at once. And it becomes another choke point that the United States could hold, and it just weakens China's control over shipping lanes that directly affect us. So Greenland is very strategically important. Now, there are some other factors to consider, of course. Do the people in Greenland actually want to be taken over? 84% of them want freedom from Denmark. 6% of them, 6% would of those 84, 6% of the 84% would support the U.S. coming in and taking control and essentially annexing Greenland, even if by military force. And maybe that's enough to justify it. Obviously, we can't just go around annexing whatever country we want. That's not strategically right. That's not morally right. And I don't think that's what Trump's doing. But there does need to be a caution here. We are America. We are the greatest country the world has ever seen. And I'm of the opinion that we should have a hand in every country around the world, because they have shown they can't really rule themselves. I mean, we can't either, but we can rule ourselves a lot better than they can. So I think we should have a hand in all of the countries, definitely. But we do need to also consider, like, we can't just waltz into whatever country we want and invade it for no reason. There needs to be a reason, and there needs to be a justification. I think this is legitimate justification. Greenland is massively strategically important, and it's something that we need for defense against the Soviets and to loosen China's control in our hemisphere. And we're already doing it, like what we just did with Venezuela. All right, folks, I'm afraid that is all you're going to get from me today. So stay tuned later this week for a very important discussion on why silver is rising the way it is, and also this breaking story about a J6 defendant who was tortured in prison in a federal prison in the United States, was literally tortured, and apparently his claims appear to be true. He's suing the government for, I believe, $17 million, and we're going to get into all that in a later episode, so stay tuned later this week. If you haven't already, please subscribe, like, comment, turn on notifications. If you want to email me about anything, you can email me at thecarsonwagnershow@gmail.com. You can also go to thecarsonwagnershow.substack.com and sign up there to receive an email every time I drop a new episode. Once again, I'm Carson Wagner. You're listening to The Carson Wagner Show.